My name is Ann Drum, and I'm a volunteer for American Promise, a national nonpartisan organization committed to restoring the people's voice in government by ending the corrosive influence of money in American politics. Political spending by wealthy special interests is drowning out the voices of ordinary Americans. But what if I told you that fixing this problem is one big project that can unite Americans? That Republicans and Democrats and independents all agree that this is a problem that needs to be fixed, and that fixing it can help us make headway on issues that Americans really care about. Let's dive into some data and look at the opportunity we have to do historic good for our country. Last year, the Pew Research Center asked people to describe how they feel about American politics. And these are some of the words that they responded with: divisive, corrupt, messy, polarized, chaos, bad. You get the picture. Americans have lost faith in the political process. When we pledge allegiance to a republic. Now, a direct democracy is a system where everybody comes together at the same time in the same place and votes. But in a republic, you have a scheme of representation. And when our founders, including James Madison, established a republic, they were doing something revolutionary. It was the first time a system had been created on the idea of popular sovereignty, that the people are the legitimate source of the government's power and authority. And they decided to implement that idea through a scheme of representation because they knew the country was going to be too big to do it through direct democracy. And so a republic is dependent on this relationship between constituents and their representative. This is a sacrosanct relationship. But we have evolved a system where that relationship is now infringed upon by other forces, by non-constituent donors, by super PACs and dark money groups from outside of the district, outside of the state, even outside of the country. Money is undermining this relationship between constituents and representatives. And this leads to Americans believing that their representative no longer has their needs and priorities foremost in their mind. It leads them to respond to the Pew survey with words like corrupt, dysfunctional, and bad. It leads to cynicism and loss of participation. So there are many ways that this plays out in politics, but let me just give you one example. For decades, Congress has tried to rein in the rising costs of drugs. Think back to 2004 when Medicare Part D was enacted. The pharmaceutical industry used the power of its money to protect its profits on the sale of drugs that are paid for with tax dollars. And this persisted until 2022 when Congress finally passed legislation that allowed some very limited price negotiation. But Big Pharma is still using its money to protect its profits. And the root cause of Congress's dysfunction on drug prices and many other issues that Americans care about is the money that has its grip on our political system. And that grip has become a threat to democracy. A CBS News poll last year found that 72% of Americans believe that democracy is under threat, and they point to the same culprit. Both Republicans and Democrats who believe that democracy is under threat overwhelmingly point to the influence of money in politics. And they have good reason to point to money, because political spending has exploded since 2010. This graph shows you spending in federal races in the 2020 presidential election cycle. That's the top bar, and that's congressional and presidential campaigns. Compare that to 2016, it was more than double the spending in the previous presidential election cycle. This graph shows you the five most expensive Senate races in 2022, which are the purple bars, compared to 2010, which are the pink bars. So reading the purple bars left to right, we have Georgia, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Wisconsin, and Ohio. Look at that Georgia race on the left. In 2022, we saw almost $500 million spent to elect one senator from a swing state. And you should also know that the vast majority of that money came from outside of Georgia. So all this money makes it much more expensive for anyone to run for any office. And it is estimated that members of Congress spend 30 to 70% of their time raising money for re-election. And this starts from day one when they show up in Washington, D.C. to do their jobs. So this is a model daily schedule released by CBS News a few years ago. It is a suggestion from party leadership to their new congresspeople about how they should allocate time during their day. And it starts out by suggesting they spend 4 hours a day on call time. Now, call time is that time they spend not in their official congressional office on Capitol Hill, but in a party office across the street with a donor list and a phone dialing for dollars, just like a telemarketer. And this is time that they are not spending studying legislation, building relationships that will allow them to get stuff done, and serving constituent needs. So let's talk about dark money, which is that money where dark money is the political spending where the source of the money is not disclosed. Say you have some money to spend on politics, but you don't want the public to know that you are the source of that spending. How can you get your money into the system without revealing where it's coming from? Well, you give it to one of these so-called social welfare organizations constituted under Section 501c of the Internal Revenue Code. We call these dark money groups because they do not have to disclose their donors. So let's see how they fit into the scheme. Let's say we've got an ordinary citizen. He has a little bit of money to spend on politics. What can he do? Well, he can give up to $3,300 to one or more candidates for Congress. And he can also give $5,000 to a traditional PAC, likely his employer's corporate PAC. Now, of course, the vast majority of Americans don't have anywhere near that much money to spend on politics. But the point is, there are limits to what he can do. Let's say we've got a Mr. Moneybags who also wants to spend some money on politics. Well, he can do the same things that our ordinary citizen can do within the same limits, but he can do so much more. He can give unlimited amounts of money to as many super PACs as he wants to. Now, the super PACs do disclose their donors, but then they in turn can spend unlimited amounts of money to influence our elections as long as that spending is independent of campaigns. Mr. Moneybags can also give unlimited amounts of money to as many dark money groups as he wants. They don't disclose their donors, and they also can spend unlimited amounts of money as long as the spending is independent of campaigns. It's worth noting that these avenues of spending available to Mr. Moneybags are also available to corporations, unions, LLCs, and other artificial entities. So let's look at the growth of dark money. This shows how dark money has risen since 2010. And there's two things to take away from this graph. First is just how dramatically dark money has grown in our system. And then the other thing to see is that dark money has benefited both political parties. Early on, dark money primarily went to the benefit of Republicans. Now, in the last couple of cycles, it has primarily benefited Democrats. But the reality is both political parties are playing the dark money game. And dark money is the vehicle through which foreign money enters our political system. Now, it is still illegal for foreign entities and individuals to donate directly to U.S. campaigns, but they can influence our campaigns through unlimited donations to these dark money groups. And then the dark money groups and the super PACs move the money in and out and between each other in complicated ways that are designed to mask the true source of the money. Maine is the focus of the foreign money fight right now. In 2023, Maine voters overwhelmingly approved a ballot measure to bar money from foreign-owned corporations in Maine elections and ballot measures. They passed this initiative with 86% of the vote. And then the foreign government-owned corporations and the media companies that are affected by the legislation sued to invalidate it, claiming they have a First Amendment right to spend unlimited amounts of money, even to spend it anonymously, to influence Maine elections. So we are watching this litigation in Maine on this topic of foreign money. Maine is also a prime example of what we're seeing in increasing amounts of out-of-state money, money crossing state lines to influence elections. So think back to that Georgia Senate race in 2022, where the vast majority of that almost $500 million came from outside of Georgia. Now think about the Maine Senate race in 2020, when Susan Collins had a heated battle for re-election. $200 million was spent to influence that Senate race in Maine, a little bitty state with 1.3 million people. And most of that money was out-of-state money. It came across the state lines. It bought up all the TV and radio airtime so that the local Maine candidates couldn't get their message out to their voters. They were literally drowned out by the influx of out-of-state money. And Republican State Senator David Trahan described it as being 20 feet under snow in an avalanche, and no one could hear us. So how did we get here? It wasn't always this way. 100 years ago, as the result of Gilded Age corruption, Congress and state legislators passed, common sense campaign finance laws to bar corporate money from elections and to rein in the influence of the industry titans who had too much influence over government. But in a series of decisions over the last almost 50 years, the court has eaten away at that common sense campaign finance legislation. Finally, in 2010, opening the floodgates to unlimited spending with the creation of super PACs and these dark money groups that can raise and spend unlimited amounts of money. And so the first case in this line was the Buckley versus Vallejo case in 1976, where the Supreme Court announced that money, political spending, is speech. Now, this might very well be your reaction to that idea. And then the court went further and said, because we protect speech under the First Amendment, then Congress and state legislatures have no power to limit the raising and spending of money to influence elections. And so that opened the floodgates to the unlimited raising and spending of money by super PACs and dark money groups. But the court was wrong. Money isn't speech. Money is power. And when you give people disproportionate political power just because they have more money, then you undermine that critical relationship between constituents and their representatives. You undermine the whole idea, the whole structure of a republic based on the idea of popular sovereignty. So this crisis of money in politics is a call to citizenship. It's a call to action. And we have a solution. The 4-hour freedom constitutional amendment would restore the power of Americans to regulate political spending so that we can protect our freedom, have our voices heard, and participate as equal citizens in our government. And it's very short, only 3 paragraphs, with the operative language in section 2, which reads as follows. Nothing in this Constitution shall be construed to prohibit Congress or the states within their respective jurisdictions from reasonably regulating and limiting contributions and spending in campaigns, elections, or ballot measures. And what this amendment will do is remove the obstacle that the Supreme Court put in place when it decreed that money is protected speech. And it will restore the power of Congress and state legislatures to pass reasonable regulations to limit the raising and spending of money to affect our elections. So we know that this constitutional amendment is overwhelmingly supported by Americans across the political spectrum. 2018 polling found it was supported by 75% of Americans, but I want to call your attention to some more recent polling done last year that is specific to Texas. First of all, Texans were asked this question: do you agree or disagree with the following statement? The influence of money in politics is a threat to our democracy. The Texans who responded overwhelmingly with 84% either somewhat or strongly agreed with the proposition that money in politics is a threat to our democracy. And then they were asked, do you agree or disagree with the following statement? Individuals and entities should be able to spend unlimited amounts of money to influence our campaigns and elections. And the Texans who responded, the percent that either strongly or somewhat disagreed with the unlimited spending were 74% of the respondents. And then finally, they were asked this: a proposed constitutional amendment would allow Congress and the states to reasonably regulate and limit money in our campaigns and elections. Would you support or oppose this amendment? And 76% of Texans either somewhat or strongly support this amendment. No other constitutional amendment advocacy has ever started with this degree of bipartisan public support. We now have 22 states which have signaled to Congress that they want this amendment to be passed out and sent to the states for ratification. They've signaled it either through resolutions passed through state legislatures or approved by citizens in ballot initiatives. And we at American Promise are leading the way with a cross-partisan national network of support to build on this nationwide support for ratification of the 4-Hour Freedom Amendment. So I'd like to take a minute to talk about what we're doing in Texas and how you can help. First of all, we are meeting with members of our congressional delegation. The picture on the left is a group of our volunteers who met last year with Representative Keith Self. On the right, some of us met with staffers for Representative Ronnie Jackson. We have met with Representative Beth Van Dyne and her staff 3 times. There are other members of Congress that we want to meet with, not just in North Texas, but around the state. And my invitation to you is, if you want to help us get and participate in a meeting with a member of Congress, then let me know. We would love to have your participation. And we will train you both on the substance of how we talk about this issue and also the structure of how we have meetings with elected officials. The other thing you can do is help us get speaking invitations like this to other civic groups, to chambers of commerce, like the North Dallas Chamber of Commerce that we spoke to last year, to Republican and Democratic clubs. And for those of you involved in Rotary, I have a special request for you. We completely understand the reluctance of Rotary to have programs that are deemed political, because so many political programs can just devolve into toxicity and unpleasantness. And I hope you understand by now that that is not what we are about at American Promise. We are about helping Americans come together across partisan lines to work on an issue that they overwhelmingly agree needs to be fixed, and to create the opportunity for us to do some healing of toxic politics by working with each other. So please, if you are affiliated with a Rotary Club, please help us get invitations to speak to those groups. And then finally, I invite you to signal your own support for the 4-Hour Freedom Amendment by taking the Citizen Pledge. And you can use the QR code here, or you can go to americanpromise.net/pledge and fill out that information and show that you support this cross-partisan push to fix this corrosive problem of money in our political system. Thank you so much for letting me come speak to you today. I appreciate the time, and I look forward to our time of question and answer. Thank you.